Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Judge. I'm Assistant Director of Native American Studies. It's good to see everybody for our July Lunch and Learn. This is the first Lunch and Learn since the passing of Brent Bergen. It'll not be the same going forward, but we're going to manage, and we're real pleased today. We have a good friend of ours, one of the faculty here at Native American Studies, Claudia, to have the first lecture in the post-Brent Bergen era. Couple of announcements. In August, Evan No will be he'll have one of his first duties as a USC faculty member. He's the new Native American Studies historian, and he will be here on August 19th, and his lecture is Making the Hampton Massacre, Native Resistance, Settler Memory, and White Solidarity in South Carolina. So please join us for that. In September on the 16th, our colleague Fritz Hamer from the Confederate Relic Room will be giving a lecture, The Home Front, World War I, South Carolina, talking about South Carolina's involvement in the First World War. And we're excited to announce the return of Dr. Brooke Bauer. She will give our second annual Brent Bergen lecture on October 21st. She has a new book coming out on Catawba women in the 18th century. And she's going to come and read some selections from that and talk about the research that she has done. Claudia Yvonne Heinemann-Priest is a linguist. She's the linguist here at the Native American Studies Center. I think she speaks about 6 different languages: Spanish, French, English, a little Russian, some Japanese, German, which is her heritage. I forgot the most important one. She was the linguist for the Catawba Cultural Preservation Project from 1995 to 2004. She taught at Chester Middle School, York Prep High School. And she's been teaching full-time here at USC Lancaster since 2007. She's got so many degrees that don't fit on a business card. She's got 2 master's degrees. She's working on her dissertation in comparative literature at USC Columbia. And today, Claudia is going to give us a lecture, Environmental Racism, Injustice, and Inequity. Please welcome Claudia Yvonne Heinemann.
Thank you, Chris. Well, as Chris said, I am Claudia Heinemann-Priest, and my title today. So again, it says presented by, so I want you to be aware of that. That what I'm doing is I'm giving you sources, resources, and information which are available both online and offline in various different sources. So I'm the messenger here. So racism, injustice, inequity does not just occur historically and culturally, right? Or financially or legislatively. It occurs in all facets. Probably I should stay in front here, right? So everybody could see me. I tend to walk around, so this is going to be a little difficult for me to tie myself down. So it's very intersectional. And intersectional means that everything is interconnected, kind of like chainmail, if you will, right? Or nodes. Okay, so everything is interconnected, but particularly the environment. It's more than just nature, right? This is an environment right here. So talking about environmental racism impacts all of us. So the first thing I want to do is to actually look at some key terms and concepts and to define those. And to help me with that, I have some videos for you. So here in the caption before I start video, communities of color may not be producing the majority of America's pollution, but they're far more likely to be exposed to its effects.
Is there supposed to be audio associated with this clip? We don't hear it.
Here we go. Sorry if you weren't able to see the captions down in the bottom. I guess when I enlarged the YouTube video, it kind of cut off the bottom because we have this Zoom strip right there. So that's also to all the people that are listening online. This is available on YouTube, by the way, and I can share the link with you if you'd like to take a look at it. And the music is supposed to be jarring. It's not, so it wasn't an audio problem on my computer. It was supposed to be a little gritty sounding. The environmental justice movement, now that's kind of like a counteraction, right? Has broadened the perspective of the environment and environmental issues beyond the scope of conservation and preservation of natural resources, and has defined the environment as where we live, work, play, learn, and pray. So again, remember what I said, you know, sometimes when we think of environment, we think of nature, but it's much more than that. The environmental justice movement is an intergenerational, multiracial, and international movement that promotes environmental, economic, and social justice by recognizing the direct link between economic, environmental, and health issues, and demanding a safe, clean community and workplace environment. So environmental justice, again, here you can see everything is interconnected, right? You have political ecology, social movements, environmental laws, fair treatment, and so on. I'm not going to enlarge the screen this time.
So this is a city. Here are all the people living in it. People of all different colors, ages, wealths, and incomes. Except they don't all live together in the same place. They're separated into different parts of the city by what color they are, what language they speak, and how much money they have. And those different parts of the city look quite different. The parts that are whiter and wealthier tend to have green spaces, grocery stores with nutritious organic food, and of course some money to buy it, and are often far away from pollution-emitting freeways. The parts that are poorer and more diverse tend to have industrial sites, heavy-duty diesel-polluted ports and highways, and hazardous waste. All things that the city relies on to run properly, but that heavily pollute the air and water. And even if they had those grocery stores with nutritious organic food, most residents there couldn't afford it anyway. How could this happen? Well, this segregation can be traced back to race-based zoning and housing policies, but it wasn't always as deliberate as plain old racism. Some separations can simply be traced to poor land use planning. And as a result, these residents of the same city live very different lives. Say the city realizes it has an emissions problem. It comes up with a plan to reduce air pollution, plant more trees to suck up the carbon, or start a cap and trade program. But those trees get planted in the neighborhoods that are already green, and the factories that are spewing toxins into the air just buy more carbon offsets and keep spewing their toxins. The benefits of these programs are enjoyed by the communities that are already doing just fine, and the communities that were hurting most from all that air pollution, well, they're still hurting. This isn't just an imaginary city. This is the story of real cities all across the US, where people might live in the very same area code, but their race, ethnicity, or wealth and income bracket causes them to experience wildly different quality of air, water, and life. In fact, it can even mean that they also experience different deaths. That's how serious this stuff is. This kind of inequity expands far beyond cities too. Rural areas are full of commercially valuable resources like oil and coal, and they're also home to Indigenous and low-income communities. But when those resources are extracted, those communities don't see any of the money, and they end up with all the air and water contamination that's left over from the extraction. And we even see this injustice on a global level, like in small island nations that are forced to directly confront the consequences of rising sea levels, but haven't played any significant role in the industries that are causing climate change. These peoples are sometimes forced to flee their homes because their land is literally going underwater. But the very states that did play a hand in creating climate change don't have migration policies to accommodate them. So when we talk about environmental justice, we're talking about how we can try to break down and reimagine a system that's built up on these inequities. A system where those who are already disadvantaged because of their race and economic status are made poor because they're unable to profit from the resources that the world depends on, and are made sick or worse by the environmental contamination that comes with extracting those resources. Social inequities are intimately tied to the environment. That's why social justice is an environmental issue too.
So environmental justice refers to those cultural norms and values, rules, regulations, behaviors, policies, and decisions to support sustainability, where all people can hold with confidence that their community and natural environment is safe and productive. Environmental justice is realized when all people can realize their highest potential without interruption by environmental racism or inequity. Environmental justice is supported by decent paying and secure jobs, quality schools and recreation, decent housing and adequate health care, democratic decision-making, and finally, personal empowerment. A community of environmental justice is one in which both cultural and biological diversity are respected, and where there is equal access to institutions and ample resources to grow and prosper. Environmental racism refers to the way in which minority group neighborhoods populated primarily by people of color and members of low socioeconomic groups are burdened with a disproportionate number of hazards, including toxic waste facilities, garbage dumps, and other sources of environmental pollution and foul odors that lower the quality of life. All around the globe, members of minority groups bear a greater burden of the health problems that result from higher exposure to waste and pollution. This can occur due to unsafe or unhealthy work conditions where no regulations exist or are enforced, for poor workers or in neighborhoods that are uncomfortably close to toxic materials. The statistics on environmental racism are shocking. Research shows that it pervades all aspects of African-American lives: environmentally unsound housing, schools with asbestos problems, facilities and playgrounds with lead paint. A 20-year comparative study led by sociologist Robert Woolard determined, and I quote, race to be more important than socioeconomic status in predicting the location of the nation's commercial hazardous waste facilities, unquote. His research found, for example, that African-American children are 5 times more likely to have lead poisoning, the leading environmental health threat for children, than their white counterparts, and that a disproportionate number of people of color reside in areas with hazardous waste. Sociologists with the project are examining how environmental racism is addressed in the long-term cleanup of the environmental disasters caused by Hurricane Katrina. So, what are some examples of environmental racism?
Many times when we think of racism, we tend to think of direct actions of people of a dominant group towards a subordinate group. These actions tend to cause physical, mental, and emotional harm. But perhaps one of the most subtle forms of racism is environmental racism. Environmental racism is the way in which minority groups are burdened with a disproportionate number of hazards, including toxic waste facilities, garbage dumps, and other sources of environmental pollution. This type of racism is quietly practiced through the passing of bills and laws that allow companies such as coal plants, landfills, and toxic waste facilities to be built in places that are disproportionately in areas where low income and people of color live. These facilities fill the air with harmful contaminants and lead to health issues. But what does this really look like? Environmental racism can be seen in people drinking contaminated groundwater, children playing on school playgrounds next to a plant producing toxic emissions, people being exposed to asbestos and lead in older homes and schools, or corporations attempting to build nuclear waste dumps on protected native lands because those lands are not protected by tough state environmental regulations. Coal power plants are some of the worst offenders, and according to a recent NAACP report, 39% of people that live within 3 miles of a coal power plant are people of color, and those coal plants that are in urban areas are overwhelmingly placed in communities of color. Worldwide, the dumping of toxic waste in developing countries is prevalent due to lower environmental standards in developing countries. The power of multinational corporations, the lack of power in developing countries, and putting corporate profit before people. E-waste, or the dumping of discarded and used electronics, is causing a global concern too. 20 to 50 million tons of e-waste are generated each year globally, and approximately 80% of e-waste is exported to Asia each year. The Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, estimates that only 15 to 20% of e-waste is recycled yearly. Examples of health issues related to environmental racism include asthma and respiratory illnesses, lead poisoning, and higher rates of lung cancer in those living within close proximity to coal-producing plants. The highest rates of asthma tend to be in low socioeconomic communities and communities of color. Asthma results from exposure to air pollution, cigarette smoke, dust, and pesticides. According to the Center for Disease Control, or CDC, asthma is most prevalent among multiracial populations at 14.8%, Puerto Rican Hispanics at 14.2%, non-Asian Blacks at 9.5%, while asthma rates among non-Hispanic whites is at 7.8%. When it comes to exposure to air pollution that can contribute to asthma and other respiratory illnesses, the CDC found that racial and ethnic minority groups who tend to live in urban areas experience greater disparity in illness. Toxic facilities tend to be built in environments that have little resources and political power to protect their communities. The Environmental Protection Agency is meant to help protect the environment and people from the harmful effects of facilities, but has proven to be unresponsive. According to the Center for Public Integrity, more than 9 of every 10 times that communities have turned to it for help, the EPA has either rejected or dismissed their Title VI complaints. Title VI is part of the 1964 Civil Rights Act that states public funds cannot be used to encourage discrimination. In the EPA's 22-year history of processing almost 300 environmental discrimination complaints, the office has never once made a formal finding of a Title VI violation, and 95% of the time, communities of color that live in communities with polluting facilities have their filed claims of civil rights violations denied by the Environmental Protection Agency. This is a complicated picture, and our dependence on energy production and electronics makes it difficult to walk away from. But that shouldn't mean that disproportionate numbers of lower socioeconomic groups and people of color should have to pay the higher price. So, what other examples of environmental racism can you think of that impact you or your community? What is a long-term impact on society when groups of people continue to experience environmental racism? And how does our current lifestyle contribute to environmental racism? Is change possible?
So the question is why? Why does environmental racism exist? The reason is simple. Those with resources can raise awareness, money, and public attention to ensure that their communities are unsullied. This has led to an inequitable distribution of environmental burdens. Another method of keeping this inequality alive is NIMBY protests. Anybody know what NIMBY stands for? Not in my backyard, correct. Chemical plants, airports, landfills, and other municipal or corporate projects are often subject of NIMBY demonstrations. And equally often, the NIMBYists win and the objectionable project is moved closer to those who have fewer resources to fight it. So let's take a look at 10 examples of how environmental racism and how it works. While it is acknowledged that living near landfills or toxic dump sites can disrupt physical health, less research is available on how this affects mental health. However, a 2007 study from Social Science Research found, quote, sociodemographic, perceived exposure, objective exposure, and food consumption variables are significant predictors of physical health and psychological well-being, unquote. And that there was a, quote, significant relationship between physical health and psychological well-being, unquote, specifically in low-income Black communities near a hazardous waste site. A 2005 study published in the Journal of Health and Social Behavior also found that perceived exposure can affect the mental health, mental well-being of communities of color. Quote, residential proximity to industrial activity is psychologically harmful because many individuals perceive industrial activity negatively as a potential health threat or a sign of neighborhood disorder, the authors wrote. Neighborhoods with higher temperatures are in the same areas that were subject to the racist practice of redlining, in which banks and insurance companies systematically refused or limited loans, mortgages, or insurance to communities of color. According to NPR, in a study of 108 urban areas nationwide, the formerly redlined neighborhoods in nearly every city studied were hotter than those not subjected to redlining. The temperature difference in some areas was nearly 13 degrees. In fact, according to analysis by the Union of Concerned Scientists, countries with large African-American populations are exposed to extreme temperatures 2 to 3 more days per year than those countries with smaller African-American populations. Those same counties, not countries, counties, are projected to experience about 20 more extreme heat days per year by around 2050, according to the analysis. Formerly segregated communities tend to have less green space, fewer trees along the street, less access to parks. Gerald Torres, a professor at Yale Law School and the Yale School of the Environment, tells Teen Vogue. Urban areas tend to be hotter in general, just because there's more concrete that stores heat. But where they store heat and they don't have the mediating environmental amenities, the places just get hot. This phenomenon explains the urban heat island effect, meaning areas are much hotter with fewer places to cool down. In 2019, the Los Angeles hired the city's first forest officer to increase the amount of shade in underserved areas by planting more trees. LA Mayor Eric Garcetti at the time has described shade as an equity issue. Three, many factors threaten the well-being of minority communities, such as discriminatory policing and housing availability. But environmental discrimination is actually a main cause of mortality for these residents. Air pollution and extreme heat are killing inner city residents at a higher rate than almost all other causes. Scientific American reported, and as average temperatures continue to rise, contributing to what scientists call the urban heat island effect, death and illness from the effects of climate change are expected to rise further. 4, research has shown that if you have a corporation who has violated environmental laws, the corporation is going to be fined. The fines tend to be lower in communities of color, especially Black communities and poor communities. Dorcetta Taylor, professor at the Yale School of the Environment and author of Toxic Communities, Environmental Racism, Industrial Pollution, and Residential Mobility, tells Teen Vogue. Corporations, they're not idiots. They can see this difference. Lower fines lead to more pollution, which often decreases the land value of existing homes near a factory or landfill. As a result, more industry moves into the area, creating a vicious cycle. Left with little opportunity for mobility and sparse political clout, the remaining residents are subjected to continually worsening living conditions. Five, some of the best known environmental conservation groups have racist histories. For example, John Muir, known as the father of national park systems and founder of the nation's oldest conservation organization, the Sierra Club, used offensive slurs and called indigenous people he encountered on a walk dirty. John James Audubon, namesake of the famous bird conservation group, was a slaveholder. Henry Fairfield Osborne, a founder of the Save the Redwoods League, supported eugenics. These are all uncomfortable truths. 6, in a similar vein, many argue that a lack of diversity at climate conservation organizations and in government sectors affect whether or not an entity will rightfully put communities of color at the forefront of the conversation about climate change. Larger environmental, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, typically receive the most funding. These same organizations across the board are predominantly white. Where you have people from marginalized communities in leadership, they're going to cause you to ask questions you might not have considered, Torres says. You can think of it as essentially improving information flows so that decisions are better. 7, even if you are middle class, highly educated Black person in this country, you are more likely to still be living beside or close to communities with hazardous waste sites than if you are white, working class with low educational attainment, Taylor says. So, however we slice it, there is a ratio that is more correlated with exposure to toxics and hazards with race than with class. In the notable 1978 court case, Bean versus Southwestern Waste Management Corporation, a Black neighborhood of homeowners in Houston sued a waste management company, arguing that a permit for a new facility violated their constitutional rights. A judge ruled in favor of the waste management company. According to sociologist Robert Bullard, who collected the data for this lawsuit and has since been dubbed the father of environmental justice, of the plaintiffs in the case, 85% of the people owned their homes and were considered middle class. Eight, a study by University of Southern California sociology professor Manuel Pastor reviewed data for minority populations and move-ins before and after the arrival of toxic storage and disposal facilities in Los Angeles County from 1970 to 1990. Areas scheduled to receive waste factories were mostly minority communities. After the facilities arrived, there were no significant increases in minority population. A 2003 United States Commission on Civil Rights report also concluded, it appears therefore that minorities attract toxic storage and disposal facilities, but these facilities do not attract minorities. According to Bullard, in Houston, during the time of the Bean versus Southwestern case, all of the city-owned landfills and 75% of the city-owned incinerators were in Black neighborhoods, even though they made up only 25% of the population during that period of time. There's a deliberate attempt to move into people of color's communities so that the path of least resistance tends to run through people of color communities. If you look in the South, you'll find Black communities, Latinx communities, Native American communities that were there before, says Taylor. That big polluting factory came just before the waste dump was put in beside their neighborhood. 9, energy and utility bills are a more subtle indicator of ways that environmental policies can affect people unequally based on race. A paper from the University of California, Berkeley's Energy Institute at Haas found that when controlling for year income, household use, household size, and city of residence, Black renters paid $273 more per year for energy than white renters between 2010 and 2017. Additionally, an American Public Radio report found that residents in Detroit and other cities near the Great Lakes with large Black populations pay a lot more for their water than those in a city like Phoenix, which pumps its water from 300 miles away. Communities of color get higher bills because their houses are not as weather tight and therefore use more energy to heat a similar space as their white counterparts, says Torres. To reduce energy bills to marginalized communities, you would put in new weather stripping around the doors or double glazed windows, things that are really low tech. But without these measures, the course of a year can generate enormous costs because of the loss of energy. Discriminatory environmental policies within the US extend far beyond the borders of our country. According to reporting from Mother Jones in Ipoh, a city in Western Malaysia, only half of the waste found in a dump site appeared to have originated in the country. The other half came from a variety of other countries, including the US. Much of the overseas waste was comprised of items collected for recycling. Other countries such as Indonesia, Vietnam, India, Thailand, and Taiwan are subjected to similar waste dumping. Without a coordinated effort to combat dumping in the global South, marginalized communities overseas are disproportionately affected in the polluting practices of the United States and other countries. There are rural areas and cities in China as well that have mounds and mounds of old computer parts, hardware that have some heavy metals in it that can be extremely toxic to human beings and the environment. Other communities affected by environmental racism. American Indian tribes and environmental racism. Native Americans are unquestionably victims of environmental racism. The Commission for Racial Justice found that about 50% of all American Indians live in communities with uncontrolled hazardous waste sites. There's no question that worldwide, Indigenous populations are suffering from similar fates. For Native American tribes, the issues can be complicated and their solutions hard to attain. Because of the complicated governmental issues arising from a history of institutionalized disenfranchisement, unlike other racial minorities in the United States, Native American tribes are sovereign nations. However, much of their land is held in trust, meaning that the federal government holds title to the land in trust on behalf of the tribe. That's the BIA, 2012. The federal Indian trust responsibility is a legal obligation under which the United States has charged itself with moral obligations of the highest responsibility and trust towards Indian tribes. This obligation was first discussed by Chief Justice John Marshall in Cherokee Nation versus Georgia in 1831. Over the years, the trust doctrine has been at the center of numerous other Supreme Court cases, thus making it one of the most important principles in federal Indian law. The federal Indian trust responsibility is also a legally enforceable fiduciary obligation on the part of the United States to protect tribal treaty rights, lands, assets, and resources, as well as a duty to carry out the mandates of the federal law with respect to American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and villages. In several cases discussing the trust responsibility, the Supreme Court has used language suggesting that it entails legal duties, moral obligations, and the fulfillment of understandings and expectations that have arisen over the entire course of the relationship between the United States and federally recognized tribes. Some instances of environmental damage arise from this crossover, where the US government's title has meant it acts without approval of the tribal government. Other significant contributors to environmental racism as experienced by tribes are forcible removal and burdensome red tape to receive the same reparation benefits afforded to non-Indians. To better understand how this happens, let's consider a few example cases. In the US, Native American communities continue to be subjected to large amounts of nuclear and other hazardous waste. That's from Scientific American. As corporations take advantage of weaker land laws, whereby the federal government holds land in trust, and I will explain to you what that means, on behalf of the tribes. Decades of uranium mining on the land of the Navajo of New Mexico have caused long-standing problems in the community. From 1951 until 1971, the US Public Health Service performed a massive human medical experiment on 4,000 Navajo uranium miners, allowing them to work without informing them of the effects of radiation. The effects were predictable: elevated levels of lung cancer and other diseases from breathing in radon. Years of uranium mining on the lands of the Navajo of New Mexico have led to serious health consequences, and reparations have been difficult to secure. In addition to the loss of life, people's homes and other facilities have been contaminated, right? Radiation permeates everything, including the soil where they're planting their food. The home of the Skull Valley Band of Goshude Indians was targeted as a site for a high-level nuclear waste dumping ground amid allegations of a payoff as high as $200 million. Keith Lewis, an Indigenous advocate for Indian rights, commented on this buyout after his people endured decades of uranium contamination, saying that there is nothing moral about tempting a starving man with money. In another example, the Western Shoshone's Yucca Mountain area has been pursued by mining companies for its rich uranium stores, a threat that adds to the existing radiation exposure this area suffers from US and British nuclear bomb testing. In the Four Corners area, where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico meet, a group of Hopi and Navajo families have been forcibly removed from their homes so the land could be mined by the Peabody Mining Company for coal valued at $10 billion. In yet another case, members of the Chippewa near White Pine, Michigan, were unable to stop the transport of hazardous sulfuric acid across reservation lands, but their activism helped bring an end to the mining project that used the acid. You've all heard of Keystone, the XL pipeline. It was really, really big through three separate administrations, presidential administrations. So the Dakota Access Pipeline controversy, right? There already is a pipeline, but there was another one they were going to build, okay? So especially in 2016 to 17, protests under the Dakota Access Pipeline were another example where tribes came up against the power policy and lost. The 1,172-mile oil pipeline was considered a threat to the Standing Rock Indian Reservation's water supply, as well as sites of historic importance and culturally sensitive burial grounds. Though unsuccessful, the protests caught the public imagination, drawing solidarity marches and support from Bernie Sanders. All too often, however, environmental racism occurs because communities lack the resources to raise awareness or fight a costly legal battle. Resources which are available to wealthier white communities who are better able to divert airport expansions, power stations, or landfills elsewhere in a process known as NIMBYism, right? I've given you plenty of resources here, which you can consult at your leisure. These examples are only a few of the hundred of incidences that American Indian tribes have faced and continue to battle against. Sadly, the mistreatment of the land's original inhabitants continues via this institution of environmental racism. How might the work of sociologists help draw attention to and eventually mitigate this social problem? Also, for your interest, there was a whole web page dedicated to this. You are more than welcome to consult me later on, and I can also send out messages, emails, etc. If you want the link there. Okay, so I'm going through this to show you. It's set up a little bit like a blog and very accessible with discussion questions, etc. Okay, a really great tool to use in a school setting as well. So, all this doom and gloom, some good news. This was last year, almost a little bit over a year ago. John E. Echohawk wrote a letter to members of the Native American Rights Fund saying, on Wednesday, June 9th, TransCanada, TS Energy, announced that it was pulling the plug on the Keystone XL pipeline project. This welcome news comes after years of Native-led protests, the filing of countless lawsuits, and finally the revocation of the permits by the Biden administration. The project's cancellation ends more than a decade of controversy over the pipeline and the disastrous effects it would have had on the area's tribal lands, water, and people. The Native American Rights Fund was honored to have represented the Fort Belknap Indian community and the Rosebud Sioux tribe in their tireless efforts to stop the pipeline. It was a long fight, one that was made possible by the ongoing moral and financial support of people like you who are committed to honoring the treaties and upholding the tribe's legal rights. That support allowed us to stay the course and stand strong for justice for these two tribal nations and all who have been adversely affected by the pipeline's construction. We the Northport, etc. And I did go through and I said, well, where is that now? What's the status now? Has anything changed? Well, I do have some updates. So there's a link here to an article, Keystone XL Pipeline, Everything You Need to Know. And then also actually tying it to the discussion of the war in Ukraine, right? With Russian oil, etc. So that'll kind of explain how actually the oil that was going to be mined, transported, and used would have been exported, not for use in the US. Okay, so it's an interesting little tidbit there. So that leaves us with what? Questions, answers, hopefully something that you can do. I've included here two kind of multiple choice questions, if you will, okay? So which is an example of environmental racism? The fact that disproportionate percentage of people of color live in environmentally hazardous areas, Greenpeace protests, the prevalence of asbestos in formerly white-only schools, prejudice similar to racism against people with different environmental views than one's own. I'll let you answer that for your own. And two, what types of municipal projects often result in environmental racism? Toxic dumps or other objectionable projects, location of schools, libraries, and other cultural institutions, hospital and other health and safety sites, public transportation options. Again, I'll let you answer that for yourself. Are you aware of any type of disparity in your own community that you could say is due to environmental racism? Places where they're putting dumps. Yes? Say again? Okay, yes, exactly. So where we need grocery stores, perhaps, right? Because we all can't afford to pay somebody on Instacart to deliver our groceries to us. Where groceries are where farmers markets are, for that matter. Okay, where schools are, where parks are, parks that are safe for children to use. Okay. Parks for people to seek peace in, We do have a garden across there, if you will, if you have time a little bit later on. It's not too hot for you. We do have in the rose garden, we actually have 2 Native American kind of raised bed gardens there that one of our local gardening clubs is always gracious enough to keep going for us. Of course, it was quite a challenge in the past 2 years to actually, organize all that, right? So while plants didn't have a problem growing during COVID, if we wanted to have particular plants growing in there and not just, opportunist plants, we did have to do some work there. So if you want to go look at it, there's a medicine garden there and the 3 sisters. Any questions or comments? I know I threw a lot of information at you, and I really urge you to do your own research. So we can help, we can do things to help this, and it starts right in your own backyard.